Welcome everybody, my name is Brendan Snyder. Thank you for joining me. This is Best Albums of 1993, the Hard Rock and Metal Edition. Before we go any further, if you're new to my channel and you haven't already hit the subscribe button, please click the button, leave a comment, hit like. All those things help support my channel. I would greatly appreciate it. And as an added bonus, you'll be able to stay up to date on all that's going on in the world of music, just like this with the Best Albums of 1993 Hard Rock and Metal Edition. And so 1993 was a year of very changing styles, changing sounds, and it was a year of changing members and artists going solo too. So a lot was going on in the year, keeping things really interesting, but either way it was a very amazing year for albums in general. And so with so many out there that could possibly have been contenders, I did feel I needed to put a little criteria on it to help narrow the field. So in order to make this list, the top 10 list that we're going to do here, it had to be a career-defining album, had to assist in industry-changing ramification in some way. The style and sound also had to stand apart from the musical masses at the time. Remember, we've got grunge and alternative and everything going, and so it also had to be able to thrive in this different musical climate too. And I've also got some honorable mentions. I've got 6 here that almost made the top 10 list, and I do want to point out to you, we've got Monster Magnet, Super Judge, this one here, a great blend of psychedelia and Black Sabbath style riffing that's just really good. And then we've got Sacred Reich, Independent. This one here is just a really stunning thrash release if you like that sort of stuff. And then we've also got Sepultura, Chaos AD, personally my favorite album of the band. Just didn't make my list here, but Brazilian metalers at their best in my opinion. And then there is Vai, which is a band that Steve Vai put together. The album's called Sex and Religion, and fantastic band in and of itself. Ultimately, they only did the one album though. And then we've got classic rocker Scorpions continuing on here with Face the Heat. This one here, they modernized the sound for the new era. And then we've got Winger in Poland. They did essentially the same thing here, making their heaviest album at the time and modernizing their sound there, but still a very, very good album all around. All right, so that brings us to the top 10 countdown. We're going to kick things off here at number 10 for the best albums of 1993 Hard Rock and Metal Edition. We have Fight and War of Words. Fantastic release from the band that was formed following the departure of Rob Halford from Judas Priest in 1992. Interestingly, Scott Travis from Judas Priest also followed Rob Halford joining the band, so 2 members of Judas Priest in there, but the sound is very different than Judas Priest. It's not that traditional heavy metal sound. This style was much more thrash and had a groove metal influence like Pantera. The album itself ultimately sold pretty well, selling about 250,000 copies, and they had a sizable hit with the song Little Crazy. Coming in at number 9, we've got Anthrax and the Sound of White Noise. So this was the 6th studio album, and it was the first without original vocalist, well, most popular vocalist, I should say, because he's not the original, but Joey Belladonna, who left in 1992, and they brought in Armored Saint frontman John Bush to take over, who does an amazing job here. But it was also a significant change in sound for the band. This one here emphasized a much more straight-ahead approach and melody on it, and they did have 2 really big hits on it, the song Only and Black Lodge. The album itself was ultimately certified gold. All right, coming in at number 8, we've got Sabotage, Edge of Thorns, 7th studio album, and first not to feature John Oliva, the original vocalist, singing for the band. They brought in new, relatively unknown vocalist Zach Stevens, but John Oliva did write, perform, and produce the album, so he was still very much involved in this. He did help choose Zach Stevens, who's a fantastic vocalist in his own right, to front the band. This album would also be the last album to feature original guitarist Chris Oliva, John's brother, as he would tragically die in a car accident not too long after the release of this album. And so the sound of this album itself continued to move the band in that much more radio-friendly style, and ultimately this would continue over the next few releases until moving all the way towards the Trans-Siberian Orchestra sound that would happen a few albums later. All right, coming in at number 7, Aerosmith and Get a Grip. So this was the 11th studio album for the band, and it continued to defy the alternative sound of the day, but it did update their sound from the 70s classic rock leanings and what was happening in the 80s to a very definitive 90s style sound. And it featured a trilogy of singles that were also made really popular on MTV through the trilogy of videos that featured actress Alicia Silverstone starring in them. Cryin', which went to number 12 on the Billboard Hot 100, followed by Amazing, which went to number 24, and then Crazy, which went to number 17. So all really big singles all for this album, helping the album itself to be their biggest selling album around the world, selling 20 million copies and just 7 million alone of those in the US. So pretty big album right there. Coming in at number 6, we've got Poison and Native Tongue. So this was their 4th studio album, and it was the first without original guitarist CeCe DeVille, but featured new guitarist Richie Kotzen, who came in to take over, and he helped really define a new sound for the band that came out in a more soulful, mature rock style, sort of limiting the party rock that had been on their 3 previous albums, and they had a sizable hit with the song Stand. The album itself was ultimately certified gold. All right, we're down to the top 5 here. So coming in at number 5, Vince Neil, Exposed, debut solo album from Vince Neil following his exit from Motley Crue in 1992. And he brought in former Billy Idol guitarist Steve Stevens to play on it, who does a remarkable job. The album itself was much closer in style to Motley Crue than what Motley Crue would actually do a year later in 1994 with their album featuring John Corabi that took the place of Vince Neil. This one here had 2 sizable hits on it, You're Invited But Your Friend Can't Come, which was actually off of the Encino Man soundtrack at the time and did really well over that summer, followed by the lead single from the album itself, Sister of Pain. And so while the album itself didn't achieve the heights of his former band Motley Crue, the album was a really solid rock effort that just bucked the trend of grunge at the time. All right, coming in at number 4, we've got Def Leppard and Retroactive. This was the 6th studio album, and while technically a compilation, the band reworked a bunch of old songs and completed them to make up this album here. Today, if a band did that, it would be considered a brand new album, but at the time they did consider this a compilation. And the album itself was much heavier and more hard rock than their previous release, Adrenalize. I also found it to be much more cohesive and really to stand up better over time than Adrenalize did. And it was the last album to feature guitarist Steve Clark, as he died after the Hysteria album and before Adrenalize. So some of those tracks that they took and reworked still featured Steve Clark on them, and the album itself was ultimately certified platinum. Coming in at number 3, we've got Coverdale Page and the self-titled release, and unfortunately the only release this band has done, featuring former Whitesnake frontman David Coverdale, who actually broke up his own band Whitesnake to join Led Zeppelin, or former Led Zeppelin guitarist Jimmy Page in this venture here. And the sound was amazing, merging of those 2 styles, bringing the classic rock 70s style of Led Zeppelin in with the late 80s sound of Whitesnake right into the 90s and just updating it for that sound there. And while no major hits off of this album here, the album itself was certified platinum. So I've got a side note here, a little bit of a thing that's always bugged me. I bought tickets to go see Coverdale Page at the time, and opening was Vince Neil. So really amazing. I was a huge Motley Crue fan at the time. Tickets were $50. That was really, really expensive at the time. And just by comparison, I saw Guns N' Roses Use Your Illusion tour for $20. So a $50 ticket was really, really expensive, which I shelled out for. I had second row seats, but unfortunately the tour got canceled, so I did not get to see them. It just always really bugged me. I would have loved to have seen that. I think that would have been an amazing show in 1993. Okay, number 2, Rush, Counterparts. And what would be a countdown without Rush, right? So 15th studio album by the band. The sound was still very much Rush on this, but it was heavier and it was darker, and it was using the influences of the new alternative landscape that was around at the time. And I think it helped too, because it made this album go all the way to number 2 on the Billboard album charts. The song Leave That Thing Alone was nominated for a Grammy, which I thought was pretty cool, and ultimately the album was certified gold for $500,000 in sales. All right, coming in at number 1, and probably controversial for a lot of people, but this one I felt was the best album of 1993, at least for me personally. Meatloaf, Bat Out of Hell 2. I just love this album. 6th studio album and a major comeback for him. It featured a returning Jim Steinman writing all the songs as he did on the debut. And the sound was in the vein of the debut itself, but updated much heavier and harder, also with a more polished sound to it as well. Lead single, I Would Do Anything for Love, But I Won't Do That, went to number 1 in 28 countries, and ultimately the album has sold 14 million copies around the world. So just a huge album, probably biggest selling album of that year. Not why it made the number 1 for me. I really do think that was the best album though of 1993. So in closing though, 1993, as you could see from that list, was a very diverse year in music. And while the sounds and styles were in flux, these are the artists that I felt really rose to the top, sort of the cream of the crop for that happening. And it was also a breakout year for lineup changes, solo debuts, and major artists just simply trying new things and in my opinion, working on these releases too. And so, of course, in the end, just some ultimate amazing albums were released in 1993. All right, I hope you enjoyed this for the best albums of 1993 Hard Rock and Metal Edition. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know your top 10 lists. Let me know any that you feel I left out of this. Do remember though, this is Hard Rock and Metal Edition, so not including things like alternative and straight ahead rock and roll and things of that nature. But nonetheless, let me know your thoughts. Have a great day, and I'll talk to you all real soon. Bye everyone.